Hello, friends. Hey, how are you doing? There's a lot going on around us these days, a lot of disruption, chaos, even. There are things being done in our government that are causing a great deal of disruption and a great deal of tension, of fear, and of genuine danger for many people. And that is a lot for us to handle, for us to carry. I'm glad that I get to circle with you here in this space and to spend some time, really being with the challenges that life brings to us, including in these significant times, and to bring practices to bear into our life when it feels like it's just all too much. It's very easy to settle into quite a bit of fear around times such as these. And I'm not immune to that at all. And yet, I have been sitting with and cultivating a feeling, a tension of opposites, as a colleague of mine, Beverly Evans, calls it. A sensation that in the midst of all of this disruption, all of this chaos, all of this genuine danger, there is also opportunity. There's also opening. There's also a way forward that we as a community can forge quite independently and ideally also in collaboration with governmental forces. But most importantly, that in our own lives, in our communities, our families, in our spheres of influence, there is an opening to create something beautiful in the midst of this difficulty. Now, if that feels like a challenging concept to integrate, I completely understand because it is for me as well. There is, as I said, this tension of opposites between what we're experiencing now and potential outcomes into the future and what we'd like to see, what a beautiful society, in the estimation of many, might look like. It feels like the gulf between those two things is insurmountable. And yet, I'd like to propose to you, my dear friends, that it is not. And that by settling into practices that allow us to hold the tension of these opposites, the creative tension and energy that exists when we get ourselves big enough to hold things that feel like they are the opposite of each other, that there is in fact great potential here. And this is something that I have been really settling into lately. And I have found a particular practice drawn from the very roots, the very essence and origin of the foundational principles that form the system of Reiki from its Japanese Buddhist origins. Just the simplest, most beautiful, and fundamental practice from these origins to be incredibly supportive to me in this endeavor. So I want to share it with you, friends, because here at Heartscapes, welcome, we are learning the system of Reiki to live lives that are rooted, spacious, connected, and that help us to remember ourselves, to provision us for that journey back to who we really are individually and as a community. My name is Michaela. Welcome back to the studio. I'm really, really glad to have you here. If you are new here, if maybe this is even your first video of mine that you've ever seen, I want to just share, I don't know what just happened in my mouth there. Couldn't get the word out. I'd like to share just a little bit of context from who I am that is, I promise you, relevant to the practice that we're going to circle around to. Because this really was something that I began working with before I even understood the system of Reiki. And I sure do wish that I had this particular practice back then the way that I do now. I spent many years, about a dozen years, working in a university setting, working with students to develop their social justice leadership skills and capacities. I was working with passionate undergraduate students who wanted to change the world, who wanted to make a beautiful future for themselves, for their children, for the 7 generations that follow. They were throwing themselves against systems of oppression that they saw as being an impediment to that beautiful future. And what I came to understand is that by and large, they were doing that, they were oriented towards this work in many instances because they had experienced harm themselves coming through systemic oppression, coming through the sorts of structures and isms and patterns of social behavior that have harmed people for a long time. And I began to see that as a result of that, and as a result of the way that the university structure was set up generally, we were spending nearly all of our time intensely focused on the problems that we wanted to solve. These students knew intimately, in and out, the contours and the nature and the histories of the specific problems, the specific systems and structures and issues that they were passionate about, that they wanted to see repaired. And yet, we were spending almost no time envisioning what we wanted to see instead. We were so intimate with the problems. We could articulate them so clearly. We could talk so specifically about how those problems were impacting people. We had statistics, we had personal stories, we had all of the information in the history to know exactly how these problems were harming people. But when I would ask my students, what do you want to see instead? What do you imagine the other side of this problem looking like? They struggled. I don't think it's because they didn't have a sense of it inside of themselves, right? They didn't necessarily have the conscious awareness of it because they were spending so much of their focus on the problem, and we were not giving them, as a learning space, the opportunity to focus their attention on the solution. And so I endeavored to create that space for the students and for myself, because I was also suffering from this problem, from this challenge. And so I began doing these processes with them. I would now call them meditations. I think at the time I probably wouldn't have. It felt very digressive to be doing something like that in a university classroom. But we would spend time imagining the contours of this beautiful world that we wanted to see instead of what we were actually experiencing. And it was powerful. It helps them to start putting language and expression to what they wanted to see instead of what they were experiencing. And they began to run into an incredible amount of discomfort, tension between what they were experiencing now and what they were imagining for the future. For some of them, that tension became so great that it was difficult to even do that imagining. It became painful almost to feel the gulf, the distance between those two things. And yet, I know for an absolute fact, from my own experience, from my own research, and from studying and working with people who have been doing work in the realm of movement making for a very long time, that we need a profound, grandiose, powerful, compelling vision in order to motivate us and energize us and draw us towards that future. It has to be a big enough vision, clear enough, specific enough, detailed enough to draw us in its direction. The challenge, as articulated by Peter Senge when I did some work with him around systems theory work, is that the tension between those 2 points becomes so uncomfortable. And the reality is that if we make our vision big enough and grandiose enough and incredible enough, we are actually casting that vision far into the future. So far into the future that we probably will not live to see it. It's an indigenous perspective that we Westerners, we Americans, have lost. Oftentimes, this perspective is called the 7 generations perspective, right? Take actions today to impact, to better, to improve the lives of people 7 generations into the future. That can feel a little bit abstract. So we got to get really clear about that, very specific. What do we want the future to look like in those 7 generations? One of my other mentors, Norma Wong, who just recently published a book called When No Things Work, a Zen and Indigenous perspective on something about times of chaos. I don't remember the subtitle, but I'll put it down below. She talks about cultivating an Indigenous perspective into everything that she does. She is a Hawaiian woman of both Indigenous Hawaiian and Chinese descent. And, she reminds us that we all have indigeneity inside of us. We all came from people that were from a place and that had a perspective that was more intimately connected with land, with the cycles of life, and with cycles of time that are very different than what we think about now in a modern sense. And so the idea of holding what she calls 100-year view, making plans, making visions, taking action in service of 100 years from now, something beautiful has flowered and is flourishing and is in its fullness from the actions I'm taking today. It's a beautiful idea, and yet it can be so challenging, as was articulated recently in an interview Norma did with Adrienne Marie and Autumn Brown on their podcast, How to Survive the End of the World. Autumn asked Norma, this idea of holding this 100-year view, it's so beautiful. It makes so much sense. And yet, how would you suggest that we go about doing that without losing heart, without losing motivation, when we're thinking about doing difficult things today in service of a time that we will not live to see? And she said, you have to tell the story of that time. You have to tell it in great detail. You have to imagine it. It has to live in your imagination first, and then you have to share it with others. You have to think about not only, what the problems are and how you want the world to be different, but specifically, what are the children doing? What are the elders doing? What do you hear people say? What do you see? What is the scent that's on the air? Right? How do you go about your day? How is the average day for the average person in this beautiful world that we're imagining in fullness 100 years from now? And she went on to share some really beautiful examples of that. When I heard that interview and I heard that beautiful response, my mind went back to that workshop with Peter Senge, which was almost 10 years ago now that I got to work with him. When he was talking about this tension, right, that happens between our current reality and a vision that we're holding for the future. He gave the example of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. That speech is a masterclass in holding this tension of opposites, in clearly articulating the realities of the present, not shying away from it, not avoiding it, not sugarcoating it, downplaying it, very clearly saying, this is what's happening, this, and this. This is how it looks. This is what my children are experiencing. And I have a dream that looks like this, and explain that in great detail. In my dream, in the future that we're working towards, this is how the day looks. This is how the children are treated. This is how the relationships look amongst the races that are now fighting each other. And then back to the current reality. These are the things that are happening. This is what I see happening in the streets. This is what happened in Baltimore last week. And yet I have a dream that in the future, this is how it's going to look. And he goes back and forth between the current reality and this beautiful vision. Back and forth creates this tension, this incredible creative tension between the two, holding this attitude of upliftment, of joy, of possibility. This is why I think that speech is so lasting, so endearing. I mean, he alone made so many incredible speeches, but that's the one that is so often pointed to. One that I recently learned, he didn't write ahead of time. He just ad-libbed it in the moment. It just came out of him. It's a masterclass in navigating the tension of opposites. And the thing is, we know from his personal writings, from letters he wrote, from his journals, he was absolutely clear that he was not going to live to see it. He knew that he would not live to see the fullness of that dream. He knew, however, that that fullness, that radical, incredible vision, so different from what the current reality was was necessary to have the gravitational pull needed to drag society in its direction, to motivate people to work, to get up every day, to make that effort, to sustain a bus boycott for over a year, to step into danger, to put themselves in harm's way, for allies to intervene in violence that was happening in front of them when they could have chosen to step back and not intervene. That we needed that kind of uplifting, imaginal projection of what could be to move us in that direction. He knew he was casting 100-year vision, and that all along the way, if we held that vision together, we would make movement in its direction. And so that premise has been with me for a long time. And it began as an organic feeling inside of me that there was something missing when I was only working with my students on articulating the problems, understanding them in great detail. That we needed to hold the solution not only on paper as a set of policies, as a list of laws, but as a feeling in our bodies. How is it going to feel when we're in this space? Or maybe how are our great-grandchildren going to feel when they are living into the dream that we cast now? I didn't have practices at the time. I didn't know how to do what I was trying to do. I'm proud of what I figured out on my own. But I'm so glad that in these intervening 15 years or more, God, time is so weird. Maybe more than 15 years that happened. I'm in such a different place. I have so many practices and experiences that help me to really feel the truth of our capacity to not only hold this tension of opposites, but to allow us to be motivated by them and to make things come true in the world. So friends, this is part of why I'm here. This is what I have to offer to you, not only in these times of disruption and chaos, not only in the times of disruption and chaos 5 years ago during COVID when I first started talking to you here on YouTube, but in any time when there's a gap between what we are experiencing now and what we desperately want to be experiencing, which could be as simple as we want to change our job. We want our health to be different, right? This can be on the personal level as well as the political level, as the societal level. At any scale, we might feel this tension between what is true now and what we would like to be true in the future. So that was a lot. That was a lot of minutes of giving you context for what we're actually here to do today, which is a practice. The practice. Okay, let's talk about the practice and then we're going to do it. Okay. The practice, look, I just automatically did it with my hands. The practice is, as I said, one of the most foundational practices within many systems, in the system of Reiki, in the Buddhist foundations of that system. In Japanese, in those Buddhist origins, the practice is called Gasho. And it's the simple mudra of putting the palms together, usually at the level of our heart. There are certain practices in Reiki that has us bring it to our head. There are some that have us bring it to our bellies, but usually here at the heart. The word gasho in Japanese means, it's just translated directly, and then as is true for most Japanese phrases, because Japanese is such a beautiful, expansive, poetic, metaphoric language. I love it so much. There's the kind of conventional translation, and then there's the like, okay, but what does it mean, right? Like, what is it really? What is the heart of what this means? So conventionally, gasho means simply to place the palms together. It describes the mudra, the gesture itself. But why do that? What is the relevance of that within this particular system of thought? Of course, this gesture exists in many traditions, right? In Christianity, this is the prayer position where you would direct your prayers. In many traditions, there is this mudra. So in the Buddhist tradition, Japanese Buddhist tradition, this is specifically drawing our attention to a key concept of interconnection, of the coming together of opposites, the resolution of the tension of opposites, non-duality, right? So the coming together of opposing thoughts, energies, forces, emotions, feelings, experiences. And ultimately, it's a gesture that when meditated upon, when worked into our practice daily, helps us to feel, to embody that essential element of interconnection. The belief, or Buddhists would say the truth, that all life is interconnected. And that while we experience ourselves as independent, as sovereign, as individual, that is true in the terms of our relative reality of our daily life, living in a body, in a world. In the ultimate reality of the truth of the universe, all life is one life. All life is one. We are all interconnected. All time is one. The past, the future, the present, it's all simply now. This concept can help us to resolve the tension of opposites. And again, this is one that I've been working with as I'm sitting with the intensity of what is happening in our society right now, which I have a very specific political orientation towards. If you've been with me for a while, you probably have a sense of it. And this deep sense, this deep belief, I would even say, that there is an opening, that there is a possibility here. And that if we can articulate what we want to see on the other side of that opening, that we are more likely to align our behavior, our choices, our decisions in service of that vision. If we're able to dream it, then it is more likely that it will be. If we can hold that vision and allow it to have enough gravitational pull to compel us forward, rather than focusing all of our attention and energy on what is harming us. That might seem, again, like opposites. You want me to just focus on the future and not dealing with the realities of the present? Not exactly. I want you to understand, I want you to feel in your body what it is that you are moving towards as you make decisions in the present, so that you can make decisions and take actions that are in service of that beautiful dream, more so than they are reactionary and coming from a fearful place about what is happening now. That you can stay grounded and open and connected as you deal with the realities of what you are experiencing, which I know for many of us are incredibly difficult, frightening, and dangerous realities. So, in order to share this practice with you, I want to provoke in us the tension of opposites by sharing a piece of writing that was done by a dear friend and colleague of mine, Cari Nunez. She is a brilliant astrologer. She's also a former professor. We both are recovering academics who have found our place in working in the unseen realm, but bringing that passion that we had for students, for academics, for using the realm of learning and knowledge to better our society. So she's a great friend and ally. And in her most recent blog on her website, which I will put down below, she wrote this beautiful description of what could be. A beautiful story about the beautiful future that could be in our sights, that could result from the openings and the shifts and even the disruptions and the chaos that are happening right now. I want to pause here and say that This is so important to me, and I think to us, this practice as communities of telling the stories of what we want to see, of casting our vision for the 100-year view, that I want to create a space for us to do that work together, and I have created that space. It's called the Story Casting Loom, and it's going to be a monthly space, drop-in space where we do this work of story casting and of holding this tension of opposites, and we share those stories with each other. And I'm going to launch that with a longer offering that really has us dive into practices that help with that, navigating that discomfort, that really kind of sets the context for this quite deeply. That will be a paid offering on a sliding scale, and then the resulting monthly gatherings will be free to anybody who likes to join. So I will put that information down below as well. I'd love to have you join me. So we're going to do a little mini version of that today. So I'm going to read to you Kari's vision of what could await us in the future. And I'm then going to invite you into a gasho practice that allows us to make more space inside of ourselves for that vision to take root. Sound good? Okay, let's do it. If you're still hanging with me, thanks so much. I know these videos almost always get significantly longer than I intended them to. What can I say? I love talking to y'all. I have a lot to say. Okay, so we've got a little story here written by Kari Nunez. And as always, I'm just going to invite you to begin by settling your body in. Feeling yourself well supported by the structures below you, the chair, the ground, your body itself. Just take a couple of breaths to intentionally notice tension in your body. And with each exhale, giving yourself a little bit of movement, a little bit of response to help those places of tension to release and to relax a little bit more. With each breath, inviting your system to let go, to inviting your belly to be soft, to make space for your breath. To rest your attention on your breath as it moves in and down into your low belly, coming home into the center of your body and your being. As you rest your attention on your breath, it moves in and down and draws your focus in and welcomes you home into your center, to your hara. Just take a couple of breaths to arrive here. And as you rest in your center, I invite you to open your attention to this story. Allow it to come in and down on your breath. Come inside. Try it on. See how it feels. The story is called What Comes Next? Imagine a society that has peeled away the rusted scaffolding of white supremacist capitalism. In its place, we plant communal networks, mycelial webs of resource sharing, reminiscent of how trees exchange nutrients below the soil. We might see neighborhoods reorganized into small, interdependent enclaves where skill sets are freely exchanged. Some folks adept at healing arts, others weaving technology for communal benefit, still others tending regenerative gardens, Instead of hierarchical governance, councils form that respond to the needs of each local ecosystem. Travel is collaborative via cooperatives that emphasize relationship to land and minimal ecological harm. Art becomes currency, shared widely through festivals of expression where painting, dance, and yes, even TikTok become mediums of liberation rather than commodification. Education emerges, an intergenerational flow, elders guiding the younger ones in ancestry, in medicine ways, and how to harness digital tools for communal storytelling. The younger ones, in turn, offer fresh eyes and innovative leaps, crossing boundaries with playful curiosity. Everyone learns from everyone, braided by a radical ethic of care. At the macro level, the old borders, both literal and conceptual, are dissolved, replaced by porous community alliances. Resource extraction is replaced with stewardship. Big corporations cede to local cooperatives, each attuned to the land's capacity and inhabitants' needs. Freed from constant survival stress, individuals can invest time in spiritual exploration, creativity, childcare, mutual aid, those labors of love that capitalism undervalues. Does this mean utopia? Not exactly. Conflicts still arise, but they're held within frameworks of restorative justice, guided by midwives of transformation. Ancestral guides, land spirits, and communal circles coalesce around healing, ensuring no soul is cast aside. In this realm, intersectionality isn't an academic buzzword. It is the life's blood of policy and daily living. We can carry these seeds of imagination back into our present, each small step building emotional resilience, crafting spells of reciprocal care, forging online platforms for communal learning, services as a fractal of the society you envision. Bit by bit, we rewire our relationships, harnessing the sacred vow that trees model for us. I thrive because you thrive. I thrive because you thrive. So I'm going to invite you to notice what stood out to you about that reading. I know there was a lot there. So just take a couple of breaths and allow what stuck with you to come to the surface. If there were any details that stood out, if your own imagination created other elements, filled in some of the blanks. And as you hold this story within your imagination, allow it to work within your own imagination. I could invite you to bring your hands out in front of you, palms facing upward, arms a little bit wide. And imagine in one hand, you are holding the vision that the story describes, in the details that stood out to you and the ones that came alive in your own imagination. A beautiful, thriving, sustainable, compassionate world built by us. And in your other hand, as challenging as it might be, I invite you to place the current reality. There may be specific parts of this reality that you are particularly impacted by, or that you are particularly aware of, and others that you are not, and that's totally fine. I invite you to place something in your other hand that represents the current challenging reality that might feel very different from what I just read. So in one hand, holding the current reality, framed in whatever detail, example, metaphor comes to your mind. And in the other hand, holding this beautiful, spacious, compassionate potential. And as I hold these two, I can feel the tension in my chest between them. So I invite you to take a moment as you hold these two opposites. Just notice the sensations inside your body. Notice if there feels like tension or disruption. And begin to breathe in and down, letting your belly be soft. Exhaling that tension and inhaling your attention into your belly. And as you continue to breathe in this way, I invite you to begin ever so slowly to bring your hands towards each other. To bring these two representations, these two feelings, these two realities that seem so opposite each other, to bring them ever so slowly at the pace that works for you towards each other. Moving at the speed of your own breath, at the speed of trust, ever so slowly. If that tension becomes too great at any point, you can pause your movement and breathe in and down into your belly, into this centered, spacious place. Your breath emanating outward in all directions as you exhale. A gentle wave from your inside out, making more space inside of you. Continuing to breathe as you bring your palms closer and closer together. Perhaps you have already met each other in the middle, giving yourself as much time as you need. And as your palms get quite a bit closer, notice the sensation between them. And eventually, they meet each other in the center of your heart space. And as you rest here, or perhaps as you hold the tension here, I invite you to continue to breathe in and down. And as you do, I'm going to invite you to notice or sense a spark of light in your belly. This spark of your true self, shining radiant and clear in all directions. And on your next round of breath, I invite you to imagine that spark of light following your exhale up your center line into your heart. And as you complete your exhale, imagine that spark of light radiating outward from your heart, expanding in all directions. Let's breathe here in this way for a few rounds of breath, sensing or imagining this spark of light at your heart, radiating into the center of your palms, holding these opposites together, shining outward in all directions, making space. Each breath, a gentle wave of light from your heart outward. Let's take 5 breaths in this way. And taking your time, releasing your hands when you're ready, and coming back together in this space. Welcome back. So I hope that practice was supportive. I hope that it was clear how you might use this. I offer it to you to play with, to experiment with, and to use it in a variety of ways. Anytime you're feeling the tension of opposites, that can include opposing thoughts or beliefs that you might have about the world or about yourself. It might include tension you're having with a loved one where you're disagreeing on something. You might hold, I disagree with this person and I love this person in your 2 hands and bring those 2 tensions together. You might bring, like I said, opposite thoughts, right? Even as simple as things are really scary and I believe in a beautiful future. Bring those 2 thoughts together, those 2 beliefs. I feel really anxious about doing this, and doing this thing is the right decision for me. Bring those 2 thoughts together. So play with this. Use it in any way that feels right to you. And if you would like to explore this practice in depth and to explore some storytelling, some story casting, and what it might feel like to weave your vision of a beautiful future together with that of others, then I invite you to join me in the story casting loom. Again, that information will be linked down below. I really look forward to having you join me there. And as you go from this place into whatever the day and this world, these times have for you, may you be deeply provisioned for your journey. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I would love to know your experience with this practice, your thoughts on anything that I have shared here in this video. And until next time, thank you so much for joining me. I love you. Goodbye.